The bids are in. The gavel is dropped. Ladies and gentlemen, here at WineBid, we are finally hammered. That's right. This is WineBid's podcast dedicated to all things wine retail, wine auctions, wine value, and just wine. My name is Jeff McGurn on the WineBid marketing team. With me, as always, is Paul Walker, the savant of Suave, our wine expert. Paul knows everything there is to know about wine. And today we're going to be going through our wine
That's a good one.
Wine auction recap for the week. Boy, am I stumbling through the introduction today. Hopefully everything will be going much better during our actual wine auction recap. Let's jump right into it. We had a top performer today, just in terms of like one that got a lot of bids and we saw a lot of actions, a big market correction on the 1990 Lopez de Heredia Rioja Vina Tondonia Reserva, which started at $50 and then 10 bids took it to $160.
Yeah.
Where it hammered. So increased in value 3x for this 90 Lopez de Heredia.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think it's funny because I was hoping that you would have a sort of a segue into your wine investment expertise here and say, well, guess what? There's a bunch of this wine, younger vintages. We talk about magnums in the auction every other week or so and say, hey, buy a bunch of these wines because they're not expensive for the younger vintages. Hold on to them for 30 plus years and look what happens.
Make 3x. I mean, you'll hear me say this all the time. Like, I think there's a tremendous amount of value in Spain. Like, I think Spanish wine, personally, I think is very good. And I know a lot of people agree, but I think it's a region that is just, it's not as commercially viable right now because it's maybe not been marketed as well, or it's just not as well known.
Right.
And therefore you can get screaming deals on Spanish wine, just like you can get screaming deals on German wine and wine from a lot of regions that folks just aren't familiar with. And so they're not paying premiums for it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny because Lopez de Heredia is obviously very, they have serious following, been making wines forever, and the wines last forever. People are also, it's kind of fun to see that, the Rosato, the Rosé goes for far more than sometimes the Reserva Red.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And the white wine as well is very sought after. And I looked this up too, just for fun. And this is only the second time we've ever sold the 1990 Reserva.
2014 was the last time we sold it.
Yeah, so
$50,
and I don't think $160 is a whole lot for something this rare and something with this much, age and heritage associated with it. So that seems like appropriate for me.
And look, you can get younger vintages from anywhere from $60 to $100.
Yeah, and it's always available. It's always in the auction. It's like we've got the 04 Reserva in right now. There's Magnums the 04, like
3-bottle Magnum lots.
Yeah,
right, like of the 04.
I don't think there's any rosé or white because that stuff comes and goes really quick, but there's almost reliably every week. There's Bosconia and the Tondonia Reserva and the Grand Reserva. So, yeah. Let's
move on. Again, we're seeing some stuff at the lower end of the price spectrum, performing well. We had 2017 Morgan Long Willamette Valley Chardonnay. 4 of those 10 bids took from 20 to selling at like $42 a piece, which I thought was very interesting to see that. I mean, it's a recent page.
I think this was from a batch, a seller of a lot of wines from the Northwest, and included these Morgan Long wines, which I think I bid on one of these because I thought it seemed like a great deal. I did like some very, very cursory research into what was going on here and naturally got outbid because I think a lot of other people knew it was a great deal, but there were a whole bunch of inexpensive and high quality, Northwestern, mostly from Willamette, actually, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay for the most part. There's some Riesling and some other stuff. But anyway, these wines, they more than doubled in price. And I think we've only ever sold them one time, which was in last night's auction. So I don't think Morgan Long has been around forever, but it's rare.
This was cool. The 1962 Inglenook Charbonneau
split,
like a 335 milliliter, started at $30, which was a phenomenal deal for a 62 Inglenook Charbonneau.
1962 California, yeah, that's
right. Like just a phenomenal deal for that, and then it gets all the way up to $140.
Yeah,
where it sells. And I mean, I thought that was just hysterical. I mean, but what a cool bottle that is, right? Like,
good luck replacing that. I mean,
right?
I doubt there was any other, auction data at all for this particular wine. I know we've sold older Ingleduc Charbonneau before. I don't think we've ever sold 62 half bottles, but yeah, very, very cool. I think there were some like mid 60s vintages in not too long ago, mid to late 60s you see, but 62, that's a rare one. And so that's a sweet bottle for sure.
And then the only other one that I'll mention before we go over to the heavy hitters is this 91 Cune Imperial Rioja Gran Reserva, which along the Spanish wine with great value, started at $45. We had 4 of them. They ended up hammering for $110.
Yeah, those seem to me, I mean, this is interesting for sure. I wouldn't have expected them to go for that much because, I mean, that's a lot of these wines, I think, well, they last forever and ever, but you tend to see, vintages from the 80s that I want to say are not as much as the 91. So I was actually quite surprised. In fact, we saw the 88, I think, recently. I guess it was close and hammered for 110. But, some of the other, I think, mid-80s vintages haven't been as expensive. So anyway, that's another rare one, right? That's another vintage that, again, I don't think we've seen too many sales of the 91 Gran Reserva. Last hammer was in 2010. So it's been a while.
Yeah, we're just not seeing a lot of these bottles. I mean, even at their price, like I still think they represent, tremendous value for the money. I mean, it's still very good wine. It's got great age on it. They age very well for the most part. Let's jump over to some heavy hitters. Probably not surprising that at the top end of the spectrum, Burgundy is back on top with a bottle of 1990 Domaine de la Romanée-Conti, selling for $78,800. We had a 3-pack of 2019 Screaming Eagle Cabernet Sauvignon OWC sell for $75.45, and then back in third is is Burgundy with a 1998 Domaine d'Auvergne Criot Batard Montrachet for $59.25, followed by Harlan's, 2 6-bottle lots, an 05 and a 99 for $45.80 and $43.80. And then I'll top it off with another DRC, 2017 Latache for $37.35 before. Let's talk about some weekly winners, right? Let's talk about some things that we've seen a lot of movement just in the industry. I mean, we've got this 96 Bruno Giacosa Barola Folletto Reserva that sold for $670. That's the high since May of 2022, where its most recent hammer at another auction house was at $525. So we're seeing a premium being paid for that 96 Giacosa. Bond Matriarch 2008 3-bottle.
This is wild. This is
$900.
The Matriarch for $300 a bottle.
$300 a bottle.
What? Like Bond is just really taken off in the last couple of years, and to see Matriarch at 300, I mean,
well, especially
that's wild.
It was at another auction house last month, competitor who we shall not name, sold for $454, and another auction house in June sold for $650. So to see it come up to $900, I mean, crazy. Is this what we're talking about? Like, is everyone really taking a step down, and so it's going to make Matriarch increase in price? Will we see, some of the other bonds that are higher priced come down?
I don't think so. I think it depends on the vintage, because like older Matriarch does still come into auction, fairly regularly, and the prices are not even close to $300 a bottle. Like, let's see, the 14 hammered at $180, the 15 just hammered at $215. The 16, which is a phenomenal vintage, hammered at $190. So they're all, almost $100 less per bottle than the 18. So to me, and it has nothing to do with scores where it used to, right? These wines used to be super score dependent. And then, in the sort of mid 2000s, the scores were never that great. I don't know. Then Parker stopped rating wines, and after the 14 vintage or something. And so it doesn't really make sense to me why the 18 is going for 300 and the young, the older vintages with higher scores are going for $100 less a bottle. I don't understand it. I don't get it.
What about this 89 Krug Brut that sold for $800, right?
Yeah.
As far as we can tell, this is a high as well.
That's what we would call the standard label too. That's just the Krug vintage. Just the vintage. I should
just
say.
The vintage.
It's phenomenal wine, but I mean, it's not Clos d'Aumônier. It's obviously not Clos Lemonade. It's the standard vintage Brut. But yeah, that's pretty wild. And that I'm trying to think. I think the 89. It's been a long time since it was released as well. So that's a tough one to replace. If you need to find an 89 Krug, it's not easy to do these days. So, but still, that's that's quite a hammer, right?
That is quite a hammer. Let's talk some Burgundy weekly winners, right? Talking about this Cocheterie, Merceau, Le Carré. Hoping I got that right. 1450, which is a high on record. The previous high was in 2021. For $1,239, the most recent high at another auction house was in July for $1,200. I mean, this seems like a pretty dramatic high off of $1,239, $1,200, which close to each other, and now we're up to $1,450. Do you think this is an outlier? Do you think this represents that? Hey, Cocheterie is going strong in the face of any other market corrections?
No, I think it's still. It's holding its value really well. And I think, maybe I would imagine some of the older vintages, like wines from the 90s and 2000s, might have peaked out a little bit, but I could totally be wrong. I've been wrong about this stuff constantly. I'm no expert, even though Jeff says the opposite. But
definitely an expert.
The Corton Charlemagne's kind of bounced around. It's getting such high prices these days. I'm not surprised. Things like the Cailleret, especially 18 vintage, more current vintages are man, that's 1450. That's really impressive. It's funny because you mentioned that Dauphiné earlier, which actually had been in the auction for quite a little while, and then the price dropped, I think, just one bidding increment, and then it immediately sold. So, sometimes it just takes a little tiny bit of movement.
$50, $100, and all of a sudden it's worth it.
Yeah, and it goes. So I don't know. I think in the case of the Dauphiné, it was at 60 something. I don't know if it was at 64.25, and then it dropped to 59.25, and somebody jumped on it. But yeah, I mean, these are rare wines to begin with. Obviously, the Dauphiné is a lot older, and that would be next to impossible to replace at this point. Whereas the Cocheterie Cailleret 18 is probably somewhere available at retail. I'm sure it's got to be close to somewhere like $1,450, even at retail, just because they're so hard to find these days anyway. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot of really amazing stuff in last week. Rayas keeps selling and keeps going for crazy prices. There were three bottles of the 08 that hammered at $1,260. There was the Meunier wines also are still really impressive. There was both 96 and 2020 in last week of Premier Cruz, Fusselat from Chamonix at 400, and then 2020 Chagnon, Louis Saint-Georges Chagnon at 425. So sort of right out the gate of the most recent release, they're doing really, really well. So yeah, it's kind of. I saw that 16 Cassiard Malconsort hammered for $1,000, which is, the Romanée Saint-Vivant was the wine that was always four figures, and now it's like now
they joined the One Comma Club.
Now the Premier Cruz are joining the One Comma Club. It's just
they're joining the One Comma Club.
It's mind-boggling. So we sold a 90 Trimbach Clos Saint-Hune for $745. I think there was a 90 in not that long ago as well, maybe just a week or two. I think we mentioned a couple of vintages of Clos Saint-Hune. Maybe it wasn't 90. It was probably a slightly later vintage.
Yeah, I thought this was cool.
It wasn't 90. The last time 90 was 3 years ago. So yeah, 555 up to 745. So that's edging its way towards four figures as well, which is just wild. And then this Tusk Estates mag, I think I actually this is one of my domestic picks last week, hammered at 1390, which is pretty wild. So, but I'm still blown away by the matriarch. That is just crazy.
Absolutely crazy. All right. And with that, I think that wraps up this week's wine auction recap episode for Finally Hammered. This has been Jeff McGurn and Paul Walker. What is your name again? Wishing you happy bidding and cheers.
Cheers.